interesting suggestions. I'm going to concentrate entirely on this proposed counterexample. So just so that you have it to focus. S is the if and only if P and S grasps P, and it's not the case that S. And so, clearly, if this were to be counted as a mental state, it would be certainly would be a factive mental state, and it would be one that would not entail knowledge, and so I would be wrong about knowledge being the most general factive mental state. Now, it seems to me that actually it's pretty clear on reflection that we should not count yigging as a mental state. I guess the issue is more likely to be whether the reasons for not counting it would also apply to knowing. And you take P to be some proposition that we have no particular opinion about. Let's say that the proposition that the number of stars is even or something like that. And then just take two scenarios which are in both of them, S grasps P. You're asking, you're kind of wondering about this proposition, but S has no opinion about whether P. And then in the first of these scenarios, P is true, and in the second, it's false. So since S has no opinion, S doesn't know. So this is the first scenario is one where S does give P, and the second scenario is one where it's not the case that S gives. And there's no other difference between these two scenarios as far as concerns S, except in one the proposition is true, in the other it's false. Now, it seems to me the natural thing to say here is that S is in exactly the same mental state in these two scenarios, and therefore that gigging is not a mental state. It's a combination of a mental state and something else, the contract P. Now, of course, if you accept that, you might think, well, won't there be a corresponding argument that knowing is also not a mental state? Because, well, we'd have to be a bit more careful, but the idea would be that in one scenario we have a case of knowledge, and in the other we have a case where, which is, as it were, there's no discernible difference from the point of view of the subject, but in fact, the proposition is false. A skeptical scenario, and so you might think, well, isn't the subject in the same mental state in those two cases? And what I do in the book is I argue that doesn't do justice to the role that knowledge plays in things like causal explanations of action and so on. And it's absolutely crucial to those arguments that the causal explanatory role of knowledge does not simply reduce to that of true belief. Because if it was simply that of true belief, then I think that would be an entirely reasonable thing to say that the only mental state we've got here is belief, and then sometimes belief combines with truth, or what's believed to produce certain effects. But I give various examples where knowledge plays a greater explanatory role than would be played in these cases by true belief. The idea is that sometimes knowledge can explain the persistence of belief in a way that the mere assumption of true belief cannot. Now, so the question would be, is there any corresponding argument for taking Yegi to be a mental state? And that corresponds to some things that Cozzo was saying at the end of his talk. For example, about the transition from a state of ignorance through learning to a state of knowledge. But if you look at all those examples, you'll see that what is really doing the explanatory work is simply, on the one hand, a mental state of grasping without knowing, and quite independently of that, we've got the extra conjunct of the truth. So that it's much more, those examples are much more like the explanatory role of true belief than they are of the explanatory role of knowledge. And so it seems to me that they're not really sufficient. They don't do the same kind of work as the examples of knowledge that I give, because they don't involve the same kind of unitary state. I mean, they don't have interaction between the separate components. Now, of course, the underlying worry here is, but isn't all this just a kind of illusion created by the fact that we have this word no and we don't have this word ye? So, and as Shakespeare points out, there's a kind of symmetry between them because we could equally well have defined, it seems, no in terms of ye. Now, I want to say something about this logical symmetry. I think what it should bring to mind is Goodman's new riddle of induction. So remember that we have a definition of brew as something like X is brew if and only either X is green and I'll describe X, this is short for X is observed at 4 times. Or X is blue and not X. T and then X is clean as a kind of symmetrical definition. Now, you get exactly the same kind of symmetry between, on the one hand, the pair green and blue, and on the other hand, the pair blue and green, because you can have reverse definitions that will have exactly the same sort of form as this. So, in that sense, the two pairs are interdefinable. Now, as Goodman pointed out, if we do our inductions using brew and glean rather than green and blue, we're going to come to very, very different conclusions. Now, I think the standard, pretty common view these days is that although there is this logical symmetry between the two pairs, that masks an underlying metaphysical asymmetry between them. In some sense, green and blue are more natural properties than blue and green. It's not just that blue and green are not colours in the way that green and blue are, but the very category of colour itself is more natural than some corresponding category that would subsume blue and green. And the natural here is not meant to be something very mysterious. It has to do with how engaged something is with the causal order and how much it has to do with sharing of green, for example, implies more similarity than sharing of blue, despite all human skepticism about similarity. And that for these reasons, something close to these reasons, in some sense, green and blue are easier to mean than blue and blue. So that we already have independent reason for not taking these kind of apparently symmetrical pairs to be on par with each other. And it seems to me that what we're dealing with here is really another example of that kind. It's not surprising that, as it were, we have a word for the more natural thing and not for the less natural thing. That's because there is a connection between what we're referring to and what plays some kind of role in the causal order. Now, of course, you might think that, but suppose that we spoke a blue-green language, wouldn't we be just saying the sort of reverse things about how unnatural green and blue are? But the question is whether there could or could easily be some blue-green language. In other words, a language in which blue and green really were basic in the way that green and blue are basic in English and similar other terms, basically, virtually all natural languages. And it seems that if we just think about what's a possible human language, you couldn't have a human language in which blue and green really were basic, because the way that they're basic the way that colour terms are basic is to do with our recognitional capacity for colours, for example. So that it's not that we can always recognise colour when we see it, but we often can. Whereas with blue and green, you couldn't just have this basic recognitional capacity because you can't just look at an object and tell whether it was from the basis of the light rays that it's reflecting or whatever, anything about whether it was observed before T. Now, it seems to me that if we consider the corresponding question for knowledge and yigging, we get the same kind of asymmetry. We have some kind of course, fallible and limited recognitional capacity for knowledge. We have it both in the first personal case and in the third personal case. In the first personal case, we very often know that we know things without having to conduct some special investigation. Whereas if you look, you'll see that you actually can't I can't know that I yig P knowing P and I don't know P, which you can't do because in order to know the conjunction, you have to know the first conjunct, but also the second conjunct would have to be true, which contradicts knowledge of the first conjunct. So it's impossible, to have, as it were, first-person present tense knowledge of gigging. You could have some third-personal knowledge that somebody else gigged or that you gigged in the past or whatever it was. But it seems that this would have to take the same kind of complex form that knowledge that something was true or bleeding would take. Because if you just look at the person, sometimes in the third-personal case, in cases of testimony where somebody is an authority, we can come to know that they know P because they tell us the P, and they're in a position to know. But you can't do anything comparable with gigging. You can certainly learn from somebody that they grasp P without knowing P, but then you won't, on their authority, be able to get P. You'd have to get that by some separate investigation. So that the epistemology of gigging would have to be totally different from the epistemology of knowing, in such a way that there would not be the kind of recognitional capacity for knowing that we have. So that it seems to me there is no reason to expect, and lots of reasons not to expect the negation of being a possible human natural language in which gigging plays the kind of fundamental role that knowing plays in our language, just as we should expect that there cannot be a human language in which groove and bleed play the kind of basic role that green and blue play in our language. Of course, you might say that I haven't actually shown that it's logically impossible or something to have a language in which gigging was conceptually basic. But the point of the talk of these factor mental state operators, the FMSOs, was really just to show that this category of factor mental states is recognized in human languages, that there's something in them that registers it. And so the criteria I was offering were really only intended to work for human natural languages. And since there would not be a human natural language in which gigging was genuinely basic